welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name's Maria, and today's video is going to be an autumn reading recommendations video. Now, if you haven't seen my fantasy/romantasy version of this, I'll link it down below. So if you are interested in getting some fantasy and romantasy recs, they'll all be in that video. So this one is basically going to cover everything else. So everything from classics to romance, literary fiction, magical realism, horror, all of the other genres basically that don't fit in that fantasy category. So yeah, without further ado, let's just get into the video. So the first category I'm going to do is romance, because I probably have less options for that, just because for me a lot of the romance that I read are kind of summer romances. When I go into autumn, I'm really concentrating on a lot more whimsical fantasy-led stories. So yeah, I probably don't have the best options for romance around this time of year, but I do have a few that I think are definitely appropriate for reading around autumn time. So the first one is The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. Now her book The 7-Year Slip seems to get, most of the hype, but I actually read The Dead Romantics first by her and really loved the writing in it. But in that we follow our main character Florence Day, who is a ghostwriter for quite a famous novelist and has been for quite some time. Now that novelist dies and basically her nephew, I believe, becomes the new editor, and at the start of the story she's basically having a bit of a hard time. She's trying to navigate everything and she asks him for an extension and he basically refuses, and they don't have the greatest of starts, so they don't really have that great of a relationship. But something happens where basically Florence has to go back home, and when she gets there she ends up being followed by the ghost of this new editor, and she is the only one that can see him. So the story kind of goes from there. It has quite an atmospheric setting, so it's quite a small town that she goes back to. The childhood home that she grew up in is a funeral home as well, so kind of giving My Girl vibes a little bit. That's kind of what I was thinking of when I was reading this. But yeah, this one was a really good one. I really enjoyed it. It's quite short, but I think there was quite a good exploration of grief and trauma within this one. So with Ashley Poston, I do think that while her stories are mainly romance, she's a little bit like maybe Emily Henry in the way that she does always have kind of a deeper meaning and a deeper message within her books, from the ones I've read anyway. So yeah, really enjoyed that. As I say, just because it's kind of set in a funeral home, small town, she's being followed by a ghost, I think this is the perfect time of year to read that one. The next one I'm going to suggest, and it's purely because it's set around STEM and around it makes me think of school time, and September is when most people are back at school, is The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. So a lot of her books are kind of centered around this women in STEM narrative, and I just think it's a really good time to kind of read that, because again, it just makes me think of going back to school, and there's no other reason other than that. I don't think it's set in autumn or anything like that, but I just think it's much more appropriate for the autumn than some of my other romances. So this one we follow Olive, who is kind of a anti-romantic. She doesn't believe in romantic relationships, she doesn't believe that love exists, and at the start of the story her friend is basically trying to convince her that it is and she can have her happily ever after. So as part of a way of proving to her friend that she can put herself out there and can start to look for love, she kisses this stranger within a club, and that is none other than Adam Carlson, who is basically a hotshot professor within the college that she is going to be working at as well. So the story kind of goes from there. They end up kind of having a bit of a fake dating arrangement as well, and it was just really fun. There was a few different things in here that I would say maybe just check a few trigger warnings, but I thought it was quite a light and fluffy read overall. I really liked the relationship that they had. I really liked the banter between the two. There's a little bit of spice in here. It's not too heavily centered on the spice. So again, for me, that's a bit of a preference for me. I did enjoy it because of that. But yeah, really enjoyed this one. I love that it's kind of representing women in STEM. So a bit different than what we usually get within this romance genre. But yeah, as I say, there's no other reason that I'm recommending this other than it's science. It makes me think of school. September's the start of school year. So yeah, that's the reason I'm recommending this one. I'm kind of following on that strain. A similar reason that I'm recommending this one, so Binding 13 by Chloe Walsh, is because it kind of centers around Shannon going back to school, and yeah, it just starts in a new school year. So again, I just think it might be a good time to kind of read this one. But to give you a quick synopsis on what this one's about, it follows our main character Shannon, who is basically from quite a troubled home. She has quite troubled home life. She's been bullied in her past school, and she's starting out in a new school called Common College, and she's quite apprehensive of it at the start. She's quite worried that the same thing is going to happen, and when she gets there she actually ends up meeting Johnny Kavanagh, who is basically the all-star rugby player within this school. Everyone loves him. The boys want to be him, the girls want to be with him, and he's extremely popular, and they have a little bit of a meet cute at the start, and basically Johnny is really concentrating on his rugby career. He's not looking to get involved with any girls or anything like that. He doesn't want any distractions. He has an injury that he's trying to recover from, and he's trying to hide from a lot of his peers as well. So he's basically just like a one-track mind. He wants to get to this rugby trial, which is basically for the under-21s for Ireland, and he's very adamant that he doesn't really want to have any distractions while he's trying to do that. but him and Shannon keep coming into each other's paths and they can't really kind of resist this pull that they seem to have towards each other, so they decide to strike up a friendship and the story goes from there. Now with this one, definitely look up some of those trigger warnings. There are quite heavy themes within here that may be quite triggering to quite a few people, so it includes kind of domestic violence, sexual abuse, and yeah, quite heavy topics are covered in this one, so definitely look those up before you go in here. But what you will get in this one is definitely some found family elements. There's quite a lot of witty banter in here, amazing side characters that'll keep you chuckling the whole way through, so it's not quite a dark read, but there are quite dark themes in here, and I just think the relationship that was displayed between Johnny and Shannon is quite organic, it's quite real, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. I will say the first book I think I rated around a 3.5, so I wasn't 100% convinced, but when I read Keeping 13, it solidified my love for this series, and I can't wait to continue the series as well. So yeah, recommending this one purely because it starts out in a new school year, which is September, and we're coming into September, it's the start of autumn, so maybe it's the best time to pick this one up. And then this next one I'm recommending, even though I believe most of the kind of setting of this is flashbacks to summer and a summer house and things like that, I don't know why, it just gave me really cozy vibes, and I think it would be a nice romance to read during probably the start of autumn, so around September time. But that's Love in Other Words by Christina Lauren. And this one we basically have a friends to lovers kind of situation in here, but at the start of this story, the two people who were involved, so Elliot and Macy, they haven't spoken for 11 years, and we don't know why they haven't spoken for that amount of time. So within the story we do get kind of time jumps back to when they were children, when they met, how they kind of interacted. There's quite a few different scenes in there that are just really cute between the two of them. They kind of connect over books and words, and that's kind of their little thing. They kind of feel like they're the only people that understand each other, so they have a really lovely connection throughout this story. But as I say, at the start of the story they're kind of older, they haven't spoken for 11 years, and we're trying to figure out why that happened, considering their bond was so strong before that. So yeah, I really loved this one. This one, I read it within a day, I just could not put it down. I really wanted to know what was happening, I was really engrossed in it. It was quite a quick read, it is quite a short book, but I just think that I was so immersed within the story, I just really wanted to know what was happening. So yeah, one of those ones, if you have maybe a free day or something like that, you grab a coffee, something nice to eat, and you just sit and kind of immerse yourself within this story, because yeah, it was just a really good one. And even though it's not technically set within the autumn, I do think it would still be good for kind of around September time. It would be a good time to read this one. So as I say, we're coming into September, and that kind of makes you think of dark academia as well. So there's quite a few options I have here if you're kind of into that genre, or if you want to dip your toes in. I think some of these would be really great beginner friendly ones as well. So the first one is the Atlas 6. So this one is definitely more fantasy led. Well, I would say maybe magical realism for this one, but basically this one follows a story around basically 6 participants who are magic wielders within basically what is our world. They are invited to join this Alexandrian society, which is basically the society for enhanced learning. I think if you think of really kind of pompous, almost Oxford-esque type of learning, that's kind of the vibes I was getting here. People who kind of think they're the elite of the educational world, but it's kind of all centered around these magic wielders. So 6 of them get invited to join the society, but the only problem is there will be 5 spaces available at the end of this first year, so not all of them are going to be inducted within the society. So a lot of what the book follows is kind of the trials and tribulations that they go through to try and prove their worth and try and prove that they should be part of the society, prove that their ability is strong enough to kind of be part of this group. And a lot of what intrigues me about this one is kind of the mystery surrounding the society. As you go along, you find out a little bit more about why the society exists, why it's so exclusive, why no one kind of knows anything about it. And yeah, I really like this one. I've only read the first 2 books within the series, really enjoyed them so far. I need to read the third one, but I really love Olivia Blake's writing, so if you're looking for something that is a little bit more magical but maybe not too fantasy led, this one would be a good one to pick up. This next one is probably one that you get recommended all the time for around this time of year, and it's If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. So this one starts off with a character called Oliver Marks, who has been in prison for 10 years for the murder of one of his classmates that he may or may not have committed. So a lot of the story kind of centers around that mystery and trying to figure out what happened 10 years ago when he was arrested for this murder. Essentially what this follows is a group of students who have gone to this kind of elite acting school, and it is all centered around Shakespeare. So basically all the plays and all of the studying that they do centers around Shakespeare, and it just gives this really eerie kind of grandiose feeling about the storytelling within this one. And basically what I love about this one is you were kind of watching the students build relationships and work together, and you could kind of see as the story went on kind of those Shakespearean tragedies and plays kind of fusing within the real narrative. So you could almost say this is almost like a Shakespearean play within itself. But I really love the fusion within the two worlds, and I think for this one is for anyone who loves thrillers and mysteries or anything like that, and you want a little bit of dark academia in there as well. I've heard that it is quite similar to The Secret History. I haven't read that book, so I'm not sure if I can compare it, but I've heard it is quite similar. So if you've read that and liked it, you might like this one as well. But yeah, definitely recommend this one. Don't be intimidated by there kind of being Shakespearean language in here. I don't think think you need to know anything about Shakespeare to understand what is going on. I have quite a limited understanding of Shakespeare. I learned some of the plays when I was in school, but other than that, I don't really have any other knowledge. So I don't think it hindered my experience with this at all. So yeah, you don't really need anything to jump into this one, but it was definitely a good one if you love mystery and thriller. I think this will be one for you. So this next one is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo, and this one kind of follows, again, that dark academic feel, and it's all centered around kind of secret societies within Yale. So we follow our main protagonist, Alex Stern. Alex is the sole survivor of a tragic accident, and basically as part of a reparation for her, she is offered a free place at Yale, but the catch is that she will have to spy on some of the prestigious secret societies within Yale and filter that information back to the dean. But when a dead girl turns up on campus, Alex is kind of shaken a little bit. She doesn't really want to accept the answer that she's getting from the police, and she starts to dig a little bit deeper into this, and the story kind of goes from there. But this one, I would say there is a big trigger warning for sexual assault, which I don't know if it actually comes up on official trigger warnings for this. I'm not someone that usually has to look up trigger warnings, thankfully, but if you are the type of person that needs to look that up, definitely just look it up for this one and just be aware there is quite a traumatic scene in here for sexual assault, so just be mindful of that if you're picking this one up. But I really love this one in terms of just the atmosphere that Leigh Bardugo brings. I really like the characters. I really like the kind of thriller aspect of it, the mystery aspect of it, where we were trying to figure out what was going on, and she really expanded the world as the story went on. There is 2 books out in this at the moment, so you've got Ninth House and Hellbent. The 3rd book hasn't been announced quite yet, so I'm not sure when that book will be coming out, but I've really loved the 2 books that have come out so far. So if you like dark academia, this is definitely one that I would say that you should pick up. The next one I want to recommend is A Study in Drowning by Ava Reid. In this one, we follow our main protagonist, Effie, who is attending this college and studying literature, but the only reason she's studying literature is because at this time, women are not allowed to study architecture, which is really what her passion is and what her dream is. As a way to get into the college, she decides to take on a course in literature, just so that she can get close to kind of that occupation and that subject that she actually does want to study. Effie has always believed in fairy tales, and she's always had to, because she actually suffers with visions from the Fairy King. Now, the Fairy King is a character within one of her favourite stories by one of her favourite authors, and as the story starts, basically her favourite author has put out this competition to have someone come and help kind of redesign his house and help build his house back to what it was. It's quite a big feat because it is quite a decrepit building, but Effie really wants to try and enter this competition, but technically she should not be allowed to enter. She ends up being able to enter it, and her design actually wins, but she does have to work alongside a student called Preston. He is kind of her enemy within this. I mean, the reason that they're enemies is quite loose, so I wouldn't go into this thinking you're getting a big rivals story or anything like that. It's definitely not enemies or anything, but they do have a bit of a disagreement at the start of the book, and they end up having to reluctantly work together. Now, when they get to the manor, it's definitely quite decrepit, and it's quite eerie, and there seems to be weird goings on when they get there as well. So a lot of the story is just kind of unfolding that mystery, trying to figure out what is happening. Is there ghosts? Is it haunted? There's a lot of that going on. So I think this time of year is a great time to read this one. It's dark academia, but I do think there's kind of a spooky element to it as well, because the academic side of this one is quite weak. So go into this one more if you're looking for something that's a little bit spooky, eerie, and atmospheric, because that's what you'll get with this one rather than that kind of academic setting. But it starts off in a college, which is why I think it's kind of categorized as dark academia, but definitely just take that into account when you're going into this one, that it is much more of that spooky, eerie feel rather than the dark academia. And the last one I want to recommend is Babel or Babel by R.F. Kuang, and this one I think is quite intimidating to a lot of people. A lot of people are quite afraid to start it, but honestly I read it and I don't think it's as intimidating as a lot of people think when you actually get into the story. So in this one we follow an orphaned Cantonese boy who is taken from his home back to England by quite a wealthy man who basically has one ask for him, and that's to study for his whole life so that he can get into Oxford. Now, when he does get in there, basically he starts to see that there's darker secrets that unfold about the way that things are run within this university, secrets to how kind of the world is run, kind of prejudices and disservices and injustices that are done within this world. And I really, really love this. I do think that this is definitely a bit of a political statement. It's a way of giving us the message of, if things are translated or taken from their original meaning, do they really hold the same meaning? Do we really understand what the intention of that script was? And yeah, I think this really explored kind of prejudice and racism really, really well. I was really impacted by it, and it was a really good read. And as I say, even though a lot of people seem to be intimidated to start this one, I definitely don't think it's as intimidating as it would seem. And if I can read it, anybody can read it. So yeah, definitely recommend this one. So next up, I'm going to dive into some of my more magical realism choices, and the first one I've got is Spells for Forgetting by Adrienne Young. Now this one we follow Emery Blackwood, who is forever changed on the eve of her high school graduation because her best friend Lily is killed. And what makes this worse is her first love, August, is accused of her murder. Now, August disappears for around 14 years and hasn't been seen within this time. And within that time, Emery has just kind of kept herself quiet. She doesn't interact with many people. She's just living a quiet existence and kind of getting by. And that's something she swore she would never do. But 14 years after her friend's murder, August does come back to this town to bury his mother's ashes, and it kind of resurges all of those feelings that Emery had before. The secrets of the past start unraveling. The town want him gone, and they're not afraid to kind of show that as well. But strange happenings start becoming more frequent within the town, and again, it just leads to some secrets unraveling, and kind of the truth about what happened to Lily may start to become more clear. This one I just thought was really good. There's definitely a sprinkle of magic in here. It's much more of a cozy mystery almost. So I wouldn't go into this one thinking it's going to be very high fantasy or anything. It's definitely just a sprinkling of magic within there. I think with Adrienne Young, my favorite thing about her is kind of her writing is really atmospheric. She really immerses you within this world, and yeah, I really love this one. And similarly with Adrienne Young's other book, Unmaking of June Farrow, I really enjoyed this one, again because I think just her writing is really immersive. She really brings you into this world, and there's just a sprinkle of magic in this one as well. But in this one we follow June Farrow, and basically at the start of this book her grandmother has died, and that was the only kind of mother figure that she had throughout her life, because her own mother disappeared quite some time ago when she was a baby, and a lot of people kind of speculate within the town it was because of madness that kind of comes for all of the Farrow women. Now her grandmother did show some signs of this, so June is quite afraid that the same thing is going to happen to her, and in fact she has already seen some signs of that madness creeping into her own mentality as well. After her grandmother's death, she does start to follow some clues that lead to the answers of her mother's disappearance. Also starts to see this mysterious door appearing, and she keeps getting this call from within her to open that door and see where it leads, and essentially the story kind of goes from there. This one follows different timelines, and again a lot of what this book has is kind of a mystery that you're trying to unfold. You're trying to understand what happened, who people are, how they've come to interact with each other, and why her mother disappeared. And yeah, again, the best way to describe these is they're almost like cozy mysteries, so the stakes aren't incredibly high. I don't feel like there's a lot that really happens in these, but you are really immersed in trying to figure out what has happened and unfold the mysteries that she has built within these stories. So yeah, I think these ones are definitely good for if you love atmospheric writing, if you love writing that's a little bit on the flowery side but not too purple prose or anything like that, then Adrienne Young's writing is definitely for you. And then speaking of flowery writing, I would say that The Invisible Life of Annie the Rue by V.E. Schwab is definitely one that I would put within that category. So I don't think it's quite described as purple prose, but there's definitely quite a few passages in here that are just absolutely beautiful and will definitely pull at your heartstrings. In this one we follow Addie the Rue, who is living a life that she doesn't really want to live. I think it's back in like the 1700s or something like that. She doesn't want to just be married to someone, you know, she wants more from her life. And essentially one day she's running away, and within the woods she bumps into what is essentially the devil, and she makes a deal with him to live forever so that she can do all of the things that she wants to do. The only catch is that no matter who she interacts with while she is immortal won't remember her, so she could go into a shop and speak to someone, go out and come back in, and they wouldn't remember that interactions. Until one day around 300 years later she bumps into someone who remembers her, and the story kind of goes from there, trying to unfold why he remembers her, and it's kind of exploring their relationship. I think this book does have a broader message, which is, you know, what is a life if no one remembers you, or if you don't have anyone around you? What is life if you don't have those interactions and if you're just kind of on your own? And yeah, I just really loved this one. Again, I just thought it was really immersive. I loved the writing style in here, loved the story, loved kind of the overall messaging, and it is one of those books I would kind of say is vibes over plot. There's not a huge plot in here. It's not quite slice of life, but it is kind of slice of life in terms of they're just following her day to day, trying to understand how this person remembers her and how she's able to interact with them. But yeah, in terms of the overall tone of the book, it's just really beautiful. There's quite a lot of beautiful messaging in here, and yeah, I can't recommend it highly enough. And then this next one is Wayward by Amelia Hart, and this is quite an interesting setup in terms of the way this is told. So we're following three women. So we've got Kate, who is in 2019, and basically she has quite a tumultuous home life and decides to up sticks to a house that she inherited from her aunt. And within the house there is kind of these notes about the witch trials in the 17th century, and she's basically just moving there to get away from quite a tumultuous life and quite a tumultuous situation. And that's kind of our first perspective that we get. But then we do also get the perspective of Violet, who is living in 1942, and she's basically not the kind of girly girl that is expected of that time. So she loves insects, she's really connected with nature, and yeah, she gets herself into some trouble along the way, and there's a chain of really shocking events that kind of change her life forever. And then we rewind right back to Alpha, who is basically accused of being a witch in 1619, and essentially the story kind of follows these three women. So they're all related, they're all part of the same ancestral line, and kind of their stories and how they're connected and how they overcome maybe trials and tribulations within their own lives. And I just really loved the way this story was told. I really liked the writing. I really loved each and every story. This one is quite a harrowing read for some of the POVs, so definitely say again, just check up any trigger warnings for this one. But I really loved the story. It's quite, for me, I've never read anything that kind of explored a story through that ancestral line and kind of connected the dots in that way. So for me, this was quite unique. I really enjoyed it. I haven't really read anything like this before. If you're looking for something that's a bit more of a literary fiction side of things with a splash of magical realism in there, definitely look up this one because it was a really good read and not one that I would usually pick up. So yeah, highly recommend this one. So now I'm going to recommend some classics that I definitely think are worth your time and ones that I think are great to read around this fall time of year, and the first one being Wuthering Heights. But the first thing I will say about this one is this is not a love story. It is not a love story. Do not go in here thinking you're going to get some big dramatic gothic love story, because that's not what this is. This is a story about, yes, there is some love in there, but it's more about control. It's about vengeance. It's about power and how that need to control things can kind of overtake everything. And yeah, it basically follows the anti-hero in this, who is Heathcliff. It follows him from his young life up until adulthood. He's basically almost described as almost like a gypsy-like person who is taken in by this family. They take care of him up until he is an adult. Along the way, he falls in love with one of his neighbours, who is Cathy Earnshaw. Now, she is one of the kind of aristocracy within this land. So it's set around 1840s time, and she's one of the aristocracy. So obviously a relationship between them would not be possible. It would be much frowned upon. And basically the story is his vengeance on the people that kept him away from Cathy within that time. And there's a lot of themes in here that are quite hard and harrowing to read. So there's a lot of physical and domestic abuse in here, challenges within kind of Victorian morality and religion and racism and things like that. So yeah, this one's it's a really good read. I absolutely loved it. I think it's a great read for around the fall time because it's set in the Yorkshire moors, so there's quite a lot of mist and kind of cold, rainy weather, and that's kind of what's depicted in here. But I really loved the writing in this. I think it was one of those books that just really got me immersed within the story. And I mean, I like a few classics. I'm not a huge classics reader. I've quite a few that I still do want to read, but I would say if you're new to classics, this is a really approachable one. It's not one that you're really going to have to decipher what the author's trying to tell you. The writing style is quite clear. It's quite easy to understand. And yeah, I really love this one, but just don't go into it thinking that you're getting a love story, because that's definitely not what it is. And the next one I'm going to recommend is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. And this one is one of my favourite books I probably read when I was in school. It was one that we were told to read and I absolutely loved it. And it's one that stuck with me, and I'm actually planning to do a reread of this one this year. But basically this one follows Jane Eyre throughout her life. So she was orphaned when she was quite young, and she grows up under the very strict and cruel parentship of her Aunt Reed, and through that she is quite determined in terms of her life going forward. She's quite strong-willed for this time, so quite out of character for the time in which this is set. But all of those kind of past experiences build her demeanour for then seeking employment as a governess for Mr. Rochester within this town. So the story kind of starts from there. When Jane becomes the governess for this house, she starts to see that there are some secrets there that are starting to unfold, and it's kind of a testament to her morality, where she decides if she should stay there and still work with Mr. Rochester or if she should leave. And it's quite spooky and quite eerie. There's a big secret that is uncovered within this, and if you haven't watched any of the films or the book, you won't know what the secret is, but it's quite a good one. It's actually quite good. If you do like thrillers or anything like that, I think this is a really good one for you, because there is a bit of a secret that's unfolding here. Quite spooky happenings, quite eerie happenings as well. So that's why I think it would be a good one to read around autumn time and around spooky season, because it does kind of fit in with those vibes. So the next two I'm going to recommend are the last two, and they kind of fit into the horror genre. And that first one is Dracula by Bram Stoker. Now, this one I read it last year around spooky season and really loved it. It's one that I wanted to read for such a long time, and I'm really glad I did pick it up. So it follows Jonathan Harker, who starts out the story by visiting Transylvania to help Count Dracula purchase a house in England. And essentially when he's there, he kind of sees some weird things going on. He's not really sure if it's just that he's drank too much or what it is, but he finds it quite eerie, quite mysterious. He has a few sightings and things like that that he can't really comprehend within his brain, but he kind of leaves there kind of thinking that it's just a trick of the mind. He needs to forget about it. But then there are some strange happenings within England as well when he gets home, and basically there's a few different incidents that are happening. There's a woman who's woken up with strange punctures on her neck, and essentially Jonathan is just kind of investigating this, trying to figure out what is happening. The writing style in this is a lot of kind of diary entries and letters and things like that, and that's how the story is told. I just really loved it. I would definitely recommend the audiobook for this one. I really enjoyed consuming it that way, with listening to the audio while I was reading this one as well. But it's definitely a really good one to pick up around spooky season. I mean, Dracula is kind of one of the original vampire stories, and I'll get onto that in a minute, but it's one of the original vampire stories. It's the one that everyone thinks of when they think of vampires. So if you like those type of stories, why not start with one of the originals? So this last one is Carmilla, and it's by Sheridan Leigh Fanu, who is also an Irish writer. So Bram Stoker is Irish as well as Sheridan. So the Irish obviously have a history of loving vampire tales, but this one one actually predates Dracula, and it is a sapphic vampire story, so quite interesting. I discovered it last year. I haven't read it yet, so I am planning to read it this year, now that I've read Dracula as well. But basically it follows the main protagonist, who is Laura, who lives in the Austrian forest with her father as kind of her only company, until one day Carmilla comes in a carriage and stays with them as a guest. As time goes on, Carmilla becomes increasingly strange, a little bit volatile, and Laura begins to get plagued by these nightmares while she's staying there. I believe the story unfolds from there. As I say, I haven't read it, but I'm definitely interested to pick it up because it is a story that predates Dracula, which I had always assumed was kind of the original vampire story, but potentially this is the original one, and it's interesting that it's sapphic as well. So yeah, definitely interested to read this one, so I'll keep you updated on that. So I can't say if I enjoyed it or not, but it's definitely one I wanted to add to this list as a recommendation, as it's a classic, it's a vampire story, and it's one that you may not have heard of. Okay, so that's everything for this video. As I say, I did do a fantasy version of this, so if you do want to watch that one, head down to the link below and click that, because there's some great recommendations in there as well, if you love fantasy or romantasy. If you have any recommendations as well, do let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear all of your recommendations. I'm currently building my TBR for autumn, so any recommendations you have, I'd be happy to hear from you, so put them down in the comments below. If you like this video, do remember to give it a like, and if you want to see more from me, remember to subscribe. I'm posting videos like this, so book recommendation videos, book hauls, reading vlogs, all good bookish things like that. Other than that, thanks so much for watching this one. I hope you did enjoy it, and I'll see you in the next one soon. Bye!